Welcome to Vermont Artists and Authors, where we interview great storytellers and artists from the amazing Green Mountain State. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and celebrated New England author, Geoffrey Douglas.
Well, thanks for having me, Barney. I don't know about the international part, but that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure people in Canada read your stuff, so.
Well, one of my books is translated into Japanese, so I guess I'm international.
Yeah, see, there you go. Yeah, internationally acclaimed. Yeah. And so we're here. We're going to be talking about your first fiction book, Love in a Dark Place, but you were no stranger to writing books.
No, I've written 5 books before. 2 of them were memoirs. 2 of them were just nonfiction books. One of them was made into a movie in 2008. It's a book called Game of Their Lives, about 11 young immigrant men who came together to form the 1950 World Cup soccer team.
Wow!
Before soccer was even on the radar in this country, and they went down and defeated England in the World Cup, which is widely regarded as the greatest upset in the history of the World Cup. So I wrote about those guys, and they're all gone now. They're all passed away, but I wrote about them in the early 90s, what they accomplished and in their view. But I've written there were five books.
And so we're talking a little bit about the book here, Love in a Dark Place. Mm-hmm. So what led you after a career of writing a nonfiction to write your first novel?
Well, as I told you earlier when we were talking, I ran a investigative weekly down in Atlantic City for 8 years in the 80s, late 70s and the 80s. And we did a lot of reporting. My reporters did a lot of reporting on some pretty gritty stuff. The mob was very active down there then. There were a lot of killings, violent mob killings. The 2 families were fighting each other for control of the rackets down there. And there was a tremendous amount of violence and corruption. 2 straight mayors went to jail. It was really, it was a wild scene down there. And so I've written 3 or 4 books. I've written all my books since then, but all the time, this idea for writing a book about that has been in my mind. And I did originally wrote a book about it, a novel, the precursor to this book, which sat in my desk for a lot of years because it really wasn't. I couldn't sell it at all. My agent couldn't sell it, so I just rewrote it. 2 years ago, I decided to rewrite it. I was teaching writing down at UMass and UMass Lowell, and I got laid off during COVID. So that's got me thinking that maybe I should fill that time by doing something constructive. So I pulled the book out of my desk and rewrote it. Totally, soup to nuts, rewrote it.
Wow.
So it's a pretty dark book, but it's, as the title implies, but I'm told it's a good read.
And so because you kind of hinted at it though, is like, so how much of the novel draws directly from your experience as a reporter then?
Well, all of the whole historical setting is accurate. I mean, all the names named and the people, events that happened, that all is historical. So in a sense, it's an historical novel. And the 2 main characters in the book are a journalist, a young reporter, and a very high-end escort, $1,000 a night escort. And the book is about the relationship between the 2 of them. And it's pretty dark. It's pretty tragic, but it's a love story as well as a sort of exploration of what was going on down there then. And the Atlantic City itself is sort of a character in the book, and it's very, it's about the city and about the relationship these 2 people have. And the journalist person, the reporter person, is definitely a stand-in for me. And the escort is kind of a stand-in, as I see it, for all that. There were so many victims down there. So many people in his life were ruined, really ruined. I mean, sometimes ended. But you know, they were, you know, there was a lot of, there were loan sharks and prostitutes and gambling victims. Everybody, Atlantic City in the 1980s was a open sort of jungle for everything. You know, there was really very little regulation. The casinos came in, and it had been a backwater. Atlantic City had been a total backwater for years before that. It was a dying city, and in came the casinos with their hundreds of millions of dollars and pouring money, gazillions of dollars into this backwater resort, and it absolutely opened up every racket you could imagine, and it was a long, long time before it got under control. So that's what I wrote about. These two people in the middle, caught in the middle of the vortex of this unseemly life.
Right. And so I want to talk a little bit about kind of, first of all, before we dive into the book, kind of give people a little bit of a synopsis of what the book is about. You kind of danced around it, but.
Oh, yeah, sure. It's about, well, that's really what it's about. It's about a relationship, a young reporter who is down there in the early 80s, and he's reporting on Atlantic City, as most of the reporters did that. And he has occasion to interview a high-end prostitute, which is actually several of my reporters did that. And some of them came into the paper, and we talked to them myself. And they were very much victimized. Most of them were owned by the mob. Many of them were. Most of the high-end ones were. The street workers, they weren't interested, but the really expensive women with really more to offer the world were sort of hooked on drugs and taken over by the mob. And my reporter character, Harry, interviews this woman and then meets her again a year later by happenstance. And she's a $1,000 a night escort, so she's not, she's not your sort of standard issue hooker.
Right.
And they fall in love and have a very torrid, but also very doomed, ill-timed and doomed love affair, which then carries on years later when she shows up in his life when he's in his 60s. And she's sick and drug addicted and really close to death, and he does his best to help her. I won't tell you whether he succeeds or not because that would spoil it. But he does what he can, and the ending is sad, but somewhat redemptive.
No, because as you mentioned, so the prostitute's character, her name is Sarah, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Because as you described, she's a very deeply complicated character.
Hugely.
Addict, former prostitute, lover, survivor. How did you build empathy in her voice?
I know how people talk, and I knew about and knew a couple of those high-end prostitutes down there. We did a lot of reporting on them. I remember them, one or two especially, and she was kind of a composite of those two or three that I really met and our reporters interviewed. And they were pretty exceptional people. They were very beautiful, and they were at least somewhat, if not college educated. They were, because they were the top end. I mean, they were the kind of prostitutes that businessmen would engage for a weekend convention, of which there were many in Atlantic City then. So they were, and many of them were multilingual. They were shockingly high end and sophisticated, urbane for what you would expect from someone like that. And she was one of them. And I had a lot of. It was very easy for me in a way to sort of feel for her because I knew people like that, and not only prostitutes but other people whose lives were sort of taken over by the mob or by corruption. Some people there were a lot of people who got rich down there, but a lot of people who got broken too. A lot of ruined lives. She was one. Her life when he left her in Atlantic City, The book is split into two parts, as you know. It's chronologically divided between the early 80s, early to mid 80s, and then the 2017, when my character Harry is now teaching college at a small college in northern Massachusetts, and she shows up. Her daughter locates him and finds out that she used to know this guy named Harry in Atlantic City, and comes to him for help. And by that time, she's completely broken down. She's no longer the beautiful, urbane, fun-loving, life-embracing woman she was. She's a complete shell of herself. Very sad. But that kind of mirrors a lot of people down there at that time.
Right. And could you mention that then the dual identity of Harry, was it Harry Hopper?
Yeah, Harry Hopper.
So in like the first half, he's a journalist, and then in the other one, he's a professor.
Right.
So how does that kind of like serve the story's theme of memory and moral responsibility? How you split that book into two through his eyes?
Well, he became a professor. He left Atlantic City in 1987, which is about when I left it, and he bounced around. He was in kind of a mess for a while. He was an alcoholic for a while, and as I was, and he eventually settled down, found this little college in Massachusetts, and became a professor of English. And he had never forgotten this woman, but he never expected to see her again. And he didn't actually he wasn't even sure she was alive, because she had been such a wreck when she was when he knew her. And she showed up sort of overnight through her daughter, just out of the blue. And he got an email from this woman identified as her daughter. And he really didn't think twice about trying to help her, because he felt that he had very much felt somewhat responsible for what happened to her, because he had led her. It's a complicated story, but he had led her through a series of events that had her testifying in a trial against the mob who had owned her. And that had not cost her life, as it could have, but it had cost her her sanity, and it cost her career as a prostitute in Atlantic City. She had to run, and she just then went into a nosedive for the rest of her life and became an addict. She wasn't an addict when he knew her, and he felt very responsible for some of this, and had never forgotten her, never forgot his feelings for her, and so he took her in, and that's the other half of the book. He tried to make a life for her in Massachusetts, and to some extent he succeeded. But it's a story about two lives. She had two lives, as did he.
So do you see like the theme of your book being gratitude, or do you see it being regret?
That's a good question. If there's a single theme, it's probably the quest for redemption. He had a lot of guilt about her, and he tried very hard, as he could, to rehabilitate her, help her, and in the end, he wasn't. I assume you know what happened in the end. He wasn't fully successful. But I think the quest for redemption, yes, we all want to feel good about ourselves, and he had never felt good about that part of his life, or about what happened with Sarah, and he thought he had a chance to sort of change that, and he tried.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. there is mystery. Mystery is kind of a part of the book. What secrets did you intentionally leave ambiguous for the reader?
Um, well, there's a boxer involved, as you know, who dies, and I left it somewhat ambiguous of just exactly how he died, and that's key to the book, um, because he allegedly killed himself, but in fact probably didn't, and that was central to the court case that Harry got Sarah to testify against the mob. So that's sort of ambiguous. And Sarah herself is an ambiguous. She's a riddle.
Hmm.
She was a product of huge abuse when she was young, very young child. She was abused by her father and then her uncle, and she became sort of two people. You know, she became her public persona and her private one, which is very haunted. Harry doesn't even find out most of the secrets about her until 2017, when she arrives in Massachusetts in her second iteration. She's totally secretive. It does eventually come out, and then he tries to do what he can to ameliorate that, partly by taking his vengeance out for her on her oppressor, who is her uncle. I mean, all this is kind of disjointed as I explained it, but any reader with a book would understand it. It turns out that one of her owners down there, one of her mob owners, was in fact her uncle, her father's younger brother, who had owned her earlier on, even as a young prostitute in upstate New York, and then came down to Atlantic City and brought her down and turned her out as a high-end hooker, and basically, and sold her to people. And in the end, there's vengeance against him.
And so, like in your nonfiction work, you often attended to the overlooked or the underdog. Is Sarah the underdog here?
Yeah, I guess so. Yes, sure. She's a victim for sure. And you're right. I do that you knew that about my fiction. You must have done a little work on my. Yes, I tend to do that. Yes, Sarah's definitely the underdog. She was taken advantage of. Well, she had a terrible life even before Atlantic City, and then she was exploited by everybody down there, mainly the mob, the mafia. Her beauty was exploited. And she had, and her needs. She had nothing of her own. She's a very, very sympathetic character, at least to me, and I hope to the reader. She's a lovely person who never really had a chance from the time she was a child in a little town in upstate New York when she was being abused. She went from abuse to abuse, and the culminating in the abuses and all the abuses Atlantic City has to offer, which is many. I mean, when you pour hundreds of millions of dollars down into this backwater of a town, everybody wants a piece of the action, and the result is this culminates in this sort of abyss of crime and avarice, and just every kind of greed, every kind of there's no morality at all. I think at some point I had a line in there that one of my favorite lines of the book. It didn't seem like no one in the town had ever smelled the dawn or written a poem. And just nobody knew. There was no beauty. There was no happiness. There was no justice. There was no love. There was no kindness at all. Like I said, it's all about money and how you can screw the other guy. And that's what it was about. Sarah was at the bottom of that, at the bottom of the pile. For all her beauty and her $1,000 a night, she was at the bottom of the pile.
How do you hope this novel challenges readers' expectations about, say, like love in society?
Well, that's a really good question. There is it goes to another level when I say that what was going on in Atlantic City in the 1980s, the lack of any kind of meaningful structure, law enforcement, all about money and power, is really somewhat a parallel with what's happening in our country today. There are no guardrails. There are no, you know what I'm talking about. And what was happening then is I've many times thought about it in the last 6 or 8 years, 10 years, that there was this feeling in Atlantic City that you couldn't look to anyone for the truth or for anything resembling morality or fairness. And that's kind of how I feel about us today. And that was part of what drew me to write it. Although there's nothing explicit in the book about that. But it's very much explicit about how it was that way in Atlantic City, but nothing in the book's explicit about how it's true in the country today. The book is, the second part of the book is set in 2017, which is the beginning of what I would say is the beginning of that era. That was not an accident.
What kind of mistakes or regrets do you think we carry throughout our lives like Harry does then?
Oh, wow. Oh, Barney, you're getting in there. No, I don't think most of us have regrets on a scale of his. He basically ruined her life to the extent that it was already pretty ruined, but he could have left it alone. And he took down, he is also more than partly responsible for the death of Tyrone, the boxer, who we also engaged in trying to. This is a guy who believed that, as I did somewhat, that by writing these stories and exposing these truths, he could set things straight. And it's sort of the law of good intentions gone bad. It ended up costing Tyrone his life. It would definitely not. He was a boxer with a lot of talent. He would have perhaps pulled himself out from what he was under then. He ended up dying. Nobody really quite knows how, but probably murdered. But anyway, dead. So Harry has that on his conscience, and Sarah. So I don't know. I think when you ask me, other people, all of us, I don't have anything on my conscience in quite that scale. but yeah, I think we all are trying to believe more in ourselves and trying to outlive or live down some of the regrets we have. Harry's were larger than most.
Right.
He was a classic example of the kind of do-gooder guy. A lot of journalists are do-gooders. That's why they get into it. They're investigative journalists. They want to straighten it out. They want to make things better for the world. They want to make a name for themselves. He didn't want to do all those things. He was in his 20s then. And he wanted all that. And he ended up, in the name of trying to set things straight, he ended up making it infinitely worse, including costing the lives of one person anyway, and really two.
Right. So did writing this fiction change how you feel about or reflect on your nonfiction career?
No, it didn't. It didn't really affect how what it did is it was kind of cathartic for me to write this. Because I've always wanted to, as I said. I mean, I tried to write it 30 years ago,
Right.
but it was quite cathartic to write it, and I feel like I was able to, which I wasn't able to do when I first started this book in the 1990s. I was able to draw on a long career of journalism. I mean, I've written hundreds of stories in magazines and 5 books, and so I had a long career as a journalist, and that definitely plays into this book. I mean, I was able to draw, you develop, you learn to listen to people, you learn to pay attention, and that definitely comes out. I couldn't have done that when I first started this book. I mean, so yes, I knew when I started the book that I would be able to do that. I didn't know how easy it would be to transfer from nonfiction to fiction, and it wasn't easy. I ended up hiring a freelance editor who had been an editor at Penguin in New York, Penguin Books, to help me. I would send her 30 or 40 pages at a time, and she would tell me what I didn't get right. and how this didn't work, but because I'd never written fiction before. It was the first time I've ever written fiction. But I think it worked out. It seemed to work out. She was great. Andra Miller.
Right.
She was.
And so for aspiring writers that are maybe journalists now, what wisdom would you pass on about shifting from nonfiction to fiction?
Get some help. I mean, really, honestly, it's a pretty big jump. You're as a journalist, your entire source material is the other people, is your notes, is your report, your tape, whatever you got. And when you're writing fiction, it's all coming from up here. It's all in your mind, and you've got to make it up. And that's a big jump to make. You really, I mean, you learn that the journalism will help you to the extent that you have learned how to listen to people and the way people talk. And I have a pretty good sense of the way people talk. My dialogue is pretty good. I think it's one of my better skills. But you won't. Making things fictional is you feel like you're committing a crime as a journalist. You really do. You say, I can't do this. You don't do that as a journalist. You don't make things up. So you need to get some help, or at least some examples of how to do it better. But your journalism career will help you. It will definitely help you skill wise. It's enormously helpful. But in terms of your own mind, you have to forgive yourself every day for the lies you're telling. Kind of like that.
This is a fantastic conversation. I'm really glad we're able to connect.
Well, so am I, Barney. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed this. I really hope your readers will think about buying the book, and I'd love to hear any feedback they have about what they think of it.
Excellent. Yeah, and they can pick it up where books are sold, and they can also go to their local library and ask their libraries to carry the book as well.
They can do that too.
Yeah.
It's available on Kindle as well.
Yeah.
Enjoyed talking to you. Really good.
Yeah, excellent. I had a great time talking to you too.